¿Qué tal, amigos? ¿Cómo están? Oigan, pues el día de hoy por fin salió Ableton Live 12.2 y pues la verdad es que ya tengo rato que no veo información sobre el programa y ya hasta se me olvidó qué es lo que tiene. Así es que, pues nada, voy a ver este video y lo quería ver aquí junto con ustedes. Bueno, pues vamos a ver el video, a ver qué trae de novedades esta nueva actualización.
Ableton Live 12.2 brings huge additions and improvements to Live. Let's take a look. Over on this track, I have some chords. Let's highlight a region, right-click, and use the new Bounce to New Track feature to automatically render the selected content to audio. Let's click on this clip, hit R to reverse it, and create a sweet fill. Sounds great. Let's double-click on this track to open the device view. On this track, I'm using the new Max for Live Expressive Chords device. This allows us to create lush-sounding chords out of single MIDI notes. Here I can transpose the chords up and down to fit whatever key I'm in. I can click on this keyboard icon to show how the chords are being played on the keyboard. If I want to work with a different set of chords, I can use the hot swap icon to open up the browser and select a different preset. Awesome. Let's take it back.
Eso está bien si no sabes tocar el piano y quieres tener acordes, digamos, más sofisticados. Eso, pues, funciona.
The default for now and transpose it back up to my key. I'll close out of the browser as well. At the bottom are different controls that affect how the chords are being played. Tilt changes the weighting of velocity across a chord. Positive values emphasize high pitches, and negative values emphasize low ones. Invert selects between different permutations of the chord. And strum affects the timing of the notes.
Eso está cool.
The strum effect is determined by the articulate parameter.
Que ya lo habían puesto como que en el piano roll, pero siento que nadie le ha agarrado todavía la onda bien a eso, o yo no he visto quien realmente lo use fuertemente. Pero esto, como es en tiempo real, creo que puede ser más eficiente.
To really see what's going on, let's click the blue arrow and open up the articulation editor. Each slider represents the timing for a note in the chord. And if I want to edit an articulation, I can manually drag the sliders to achieve the effect I want. I'll adjust the sliders here, pause for a sec, and then preview, and hit save to write it to the articulation. I can reverse the order of the notes played with the arrows icon, and quantize the timing of the notes with the metronome icon. To add even more movement to the sound, let's go to the modulation tab. Here I can set different mod sources to affect each of the parameters of the device. We can also randomize the variation here. Expressive Chords also allows you to import chords from clips, allowing you to use your own custom chord progressions. Let's reduce the random variation slightly. Great, I'm happy with the sound of the chords. Let's zoom out in the arrangement.
Pues esto me gusta, porque a veces es difícil como que encontrar patrones rítmicos en los acordes que sean diferentes y creo que esto puede ayudar.
And move the loop bracket to the right to start playing with this bass sound. Over on this bass track, I have the new and improved auto filter device. Auto filter now has...
Justo lo estaba pensando y claro, con los bajos también es súper bueno para crear patrones rítmicos con los bajos. Creo que va a ser bueno ese plugincito.
Spectrum visualizer, which makes seeing which frequencies are affected a lot easier. Let's turn up the resonance to accentuate the frequencies around the cutoff. We can also toggle the steepness of the filter between 12 and 24 dB an octave. Above that, we can change the filter type. This includes classic filter types such as low pass, high pass, band pass, and notch. Let's switch to the more filter type. Some filter types have additional parameters which give you more control.
Esto sí me acuerdo.
New filter types include the DJ filter, which emulates the classic low and high pass filter found on Pioneer mixers.
Sí, ahora me acuerdo que el autofilter venía con muchos cambios y es lo que está mostrando. Todos los cambios de filtros nuevos que hay, más bien todos los filtros nuevos que le pusieron, o los estilos de filtro que le pusieron.
The comb filter creates many peaks and notches throughout the frequency spectrum, creating a phasey, smeary effect.
Ese me encantaba.
We also have the resampling filter, which creates a big crushing effect.
El vowel.
We have the notch plus low pass filter, which gives you a combination of the two filter types. Finally, we have the vowel filter, which creates a really cool talkie effect. Let's switch it back to the classic low pass for now. I want to add some distortion to the sound, so let's turn up the drive. Uh-oh, we're starting to clip. Let's turn on the new soft clip within autofilter to reduce the peaks. We can also reduce the output of the wet signal. That's better. We can also try out a few different analog style filter circuits to create different flavors of distortion. Awesome. Now I'd like to add some movement to the filter cutoff, so let's turn up the envelope. Now the volume of the bass modulates the filter cutoff, which we can see in the background of the visualizer. I can make the envelope negative to reverse the movement.
Eso me gusta que te muestre, digamos, el envelope, el movimiento del envelope, porque así te das más cuenta de lo que está sucediendo.
I can adjust both the attack and release times to really dial in the movement. Hold to make sure the entire attack phase is completed before moving on to the release. Turning it off gets us to the release sooner. Turning on sample and hold will quantize the movement. This is great for adding a rhythmic effect. In addition to using the bass sound itself as the mod source for the envelope, we can also use an external source in the sidechain panel. Let's open it by hitting the arrow, selecting external, and setting our source from the drums.
Cool.
Let's turn sample and hold off for now, and lower the attack to accentuate the effect. Excellent. You now hear the kick and snare triggering the envelope for the filter. To really dial this in, let's solo out the bass track and click the headphone icon to hear the sidechain input. Cool. The mix lets us adjust the balance between the internal and external signals for triggering the envelope. Let's add some gain to the sidechain input. Let's turn on the sidechain filter and change the type to a low pass so that only the kick affects the filter envelope. Awesome. Sounding great. Let's turn the headphone icon off and hear it in the mix. Cool. Let's turn the envelope back down to 0 and start playing with the LFO amount. We can also play with the rate to change the LFO speed. There's many LFO shapes to choose from, including the classic sine, triangle, saw, and square. Ramp up is a saw shape that always starts at the filter.
La verdad es que bien este upgrade al autofilter, creo que
at the cutoff position.
Muy bueno.
Wander, which creates some randomized movement in the sound.
Muy buenas opciones para morfar tu sonido.
Discrete steps. Most LFO shapes feature a morph parameter, which allow you to bias the LFO shape. Underneath that, we have the LFO time mode. In addition to the standard hertz value, we have the time mode, which allows you to measure the LFO rate in seconds, creating super long movements. We can also try sync to have the LFO rate be in time with the project tempo. Do triplets, dotted, or 16th notes to create some polyrhythms. Up top, we have the LFO quantization modes. In steps mode, we can divide the LFO cycle into a number of discrete intervals. In sample and hold mode, the LFO is quantized to the specified beat time.
Como si fuera un step sequence.
To the left, we have the phase offset control, which shifts the starting point of the LFO cycle forward or backward. To create a stereo effect, I can offset the phase of the LFOs between the left and right channels.
Great.
This is represented by the different colors in the visualizer.
Damn, eso me gustó.
In phase mode, you can offset the left and right channels using degrees.
Claro.
Let's turn sample and hold off to make this more obvious. In spin mode, the phase of the left and right channels diverge progressively over time. Awesome. The bass is sounding great. Let's quantize this again.
Tirando, ¿no?
Let's go back over to the drums for a bit and solo them out. Live 12.2 features massive updates to Roar. Roar now has a sidechain panel, which allows it to be responsive to musical elements around it. Let's enable the MIDI to feedback note input and get the MIDI from the bass. I'll turn up the amount of feedback, and you'll start to hear that the pitch of the feedback changes with the bass notes. Awesome, let's hear it in the mix. As a final touch to the drums, I'll use the new dispersion filter in Roar. This offsets the high frequencies from the low ones to create a pitchy, bubbly effect. Let's open up the modulation panel, go to the matrix, and map LFO1 to the frequency to add a little bit of movement. Notice how the corresponding LED in the modulation section turns yellow to show that it's being used. Great, I'm happy with how this section sounds, so let's move on to the next one. I'll zoom out in the arrangement and move the loop bracket to the right to start playing with these meld stabs. Over on this track, I have the default instance of meld, which now features a new chord oscillator. This allows me to create lush chords out of single MIDI notes. Let's put this in key, and I'll also link the envelopes for oscillators A and B and turn up the release. Sounding great. I can play with both the shape of the chord and the inversion with these macros. Let's go to the matrix and map LFO1 effects to oscillator macro 2. I'll open up the LFO panel and use the new scrambler effect to create some variation. I'll turn off re-trigger on the LFO to create some more movement. Awesome. I'm going to use oscillator B as a sub, so I'll put it down 2 octaves, turn up the shape and tone to really hear it, and maybe turn up the drive to create some distortion. I'd like to make the sound a bit more harmonic, so let's go to the browser, go to our audio effects, and add resonators. Resonators can now be tuned to the current scale. So let's put this in key.
Eso no estaba.
Up and down.
Esto del resonator, afinarlo, y esto va a estar bueno porque el resonator es muy útil para darle armónicos a los sonidos, pero siempre era muy complicado como hacerlo que sonara bien afinado y todo en concordancia con la armonía, y creo que esto va a ayudar mucho, y sí, me gusta, qué bueno que se lo pusieron.
More movement. I can adjust the dry wet and play with the frequency as well. I could even switch the resonator's mode here. I'd like to add a melodic element to this section, so let's open up the browser, go to our samples, and show the filters. I'll go to Sounds, Voice, and see if I can find a vocal loop. Let's click here and hit Rank to show our most used vocals. Okay, this one's kind of interesting. It sounds more percussive than a voice to me, so let's use the new quick tags and add our own percussive tag and get rid of the solo voice tag. I'll then open up the tag editor to create my own custom tag for this. Let's call this Wonky, and add the Wonky tag to this as well. Let's see what other sounds we can find that are similar to this. Okay, that's interesting. I'm liking the results of this search. So let's save it as a user label for easy access in the browser.
Okay.
I can even right-click on it and give it its own custom icon. Cool. I'll use this loop and drag it into the section. I like to make this a little bit more melodic. So I'm going to mute the meld staffs for a second, go to audio effects, and use the spectral resonator. Spectral resonator can now be tuned to the current scale. So let's turn that on. I can also quantize all the harmonics to use the current scale to make this sound like it's playing chords. Let's switch the frequency control mode to scale degrees and play with the pitch. I'll play with the stretch.
Es que claro, ahora que se pueden afinar
Lower the
todas
number of
estas
harmonics
cosas.
to give it a low pass effect. I'll turn up the unison to make it wide, and turn up the decay to make it longer. Let's hear it with my meld stabs. Feels pretty good.
Suena padre, aunque yo lo hubiera puesto más como, quizá como un auxiliar. Expandirlo un poco más, darle reverb y hacer como una especie de harmonizer ahí, no sé.
Now I'll solo out this track, go back to my browser, and add roar to this. I'll use the new delay routing mode in roar to give it some spaciousness. I'll switch the delay mode to synced, switch it to eighth notes, and turn up the amount for some feedback. Let's add some distortion on just the delayed signal. I'd like the delay to respond to the drums, so let's enable external sidechaining and set the input from our drums track. Let's take a listen here. Let's open up the modulation panel and take a look at the envelope input. I'd like to let in just the low end from the drums, so let's turn the frequency down. Let's disable the sidechain input preview and go over to the matrix. Let's select the frequency cutoff of the filter and map the envelope to it, so that whenever the kick hits, the filter ducks down. Let's adjust the blend to hear the difference between the delayed signal, which has the modulation, and the direct signal, which doesn't.
Me dan risa estos.
Let's close out of the browser.
Me dan un poco de risa estos ejemplos porque digo, lo hacen sonar más o menos porque ni siquiera es un excelente, digamos, demo. Lo hacen sonar más o menos, sin embargo, es súper complicado. O sea, tienes que saber un montón de cosas que hace cada cosa de ahí. Y y eso es lo que creo que no sé, que Ableton puede mejorar en eso, que no me gusta todo lo que ponen, todo lo que tienen, siempre me ha gustado, me encanta la manera de digamos, de automatizar todas estas cosas y todo, pero creo que hay un punto donde podría hacerse un poquito más sencillo, porque son tantas cosas que van poniendo que es difícil como que estar todo el tiempo aprendiendo qué hace cada cosa, ¿no? Pero bueno, pues es parte también del trabajo, hay que estudiar y hay que estarle dando, ¿no? Pero a lo mejor podrían, no sé, a lo mejor con los macros, ya con los presets que hay, eso, con los macros es más sencillo moverlos, y está bien que te enseñen cómo se hace. Pero bueno, solamente un pensamiento porque de repente veo que es complicado, o sea, no es cualquier cosa. Esto, tú lo ves aquí que lo está armando como si nada, pero realmente pues que se te ocurra cómo hacer todo esto todo el tiempo, no está tan fácil, ¿no?
Hear this in the mix.
Y como ves, no me digas que es la mejor demo, ¿verdad? Pero bueno, amigos, pues nada, esto fue todo. Ahorita quería ver solamente el video para recordar un poco cuáles son las nuevas funciones que trae. Y pues vamos a descargarlo y ahí estaremos comentando a ver qué tal nos va. Hasta la próxima.